CAPS is not really the curriculum. I cannot just sit in homeschool and have my child do this or that and say it's fine. Homeschooling is not the school, is not the A+ school for all children. Sharper than a menorah blade, so that they can distinguish the root of the root problem. Is this answer correct? Is it proper? Is it applicable? Is it fit? Is it suitable? Then you've got a teaching tool.
Colleen, welcome today to the AI in Education podcast. You are Colleen Cronje, CEO of Brainline. I'm not sure if there's a longer title than just Brainline. I think everybody knows Brainline. Maybe just to introduce yourself a little bit, tell us about what you do and what Brainline does. And, just for people who may not know, and then we'll talk about how AI can influence education.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the invitation and for the warm welcome. Brainline started many years ago. If I remember now, it's all of 38 years ago, and AI was not even a question. It wasn't even a name. The fact that we're talking to each other like this and using this comfortably in online education, I think, well, I don't even know if somebody ever dreamt about it, that it would happen this way. So we started when it was still paper-based. Online, let's call it home education was paper-based. We sent envelopes back and forth between each other. We sent tests, tasks, and assignments back and forth between each other. And the post office was actually our main, let's call it our main delivery system. And then, as you know, our dear post office was not the post office that it was supposed to be. It gradually disappeared into the sunset. And then we had to look at something else. And what do they say? When one door closes, the other one opens. And at that point in time, the internet started becoming a thing. Now, it brought with it quite a few opportunities, and AI is probably one of the latest opportunities that came with the internet. And that enabled us to communicate with our clients much more effectively, instantly, and it opened the doors for everything that the internet was able to deliver to us. Now, that included not just simple PDF files, but later on a little bit more interaction. We could speak to each other. Gradually, we could have meetings. And when COVID came, nothing was good about COVID. But I always say there's one thing that came about which was good about COVID, and that normalized online school, online education, where it was something that was strange, where it was something that only those at the peripheries of society, the far left or the far right, whichever one you would choose, were the ones who used home education. And suddenly that became a normal thing. It became a choice that every parent could make. Should they have the need, should they feel that that would be in the best interest of their child? And how wonderful of that. I think home education piggybacked on that a little bit. Because in essence, when we did online education, we were no longer in a school, we were no longer in a traditional classroom. And that meant that parents had to take charge of education at home, whether they liked it or not. So I think the two actually were, let's call it normalized, let's call it people became more accustomed to it. They felt that this is something that they could get used to. And many parents never went back. They never went back to school. They stayed within the online / home education space because they found that it was something that suited their family very well. So that's a long answer of where Brainline came from. We started as home education parents quite a few years ago. When my eldest daughter was born in 1990, we didn't even dream about home education. But lo and behold, once you've put your own child in a school, that's when you start thinking about things. Is this in the best interest of my child? So in 1996, when my daughter went to school, 96, 97, and things were not the way I wanted them at school. We as a family decided we're going to home educate. And that was actually when Brainline was born. When we started, okay, but where do I find resources? What do I do? And of course, there were other families in the same position as we were. And that's when we started looking around with what can we put together for ourselves and for other families. And that's where the envelope paper home education route actually started.
Okay, so something that I picked up, and I know that there's a lot of legislation around education, and you're free to to touch on a few of those if you like. I know with the Bella Act, there's a lot of controversy as well, but you specifically avoid the word homeschool for in favor of home education, and I know that has been a point of contention over the years that I've picked up. You want to expand a little bit on that, elaborate maybe on what is the difference or the right and the wrong of the word homeschool and home education?
I don't know whether there's a big difference. Let me give you my point of view. And of course, one has to take away from that what you feel is the correct definition. In the South African Schools Act, there are only three legal types of school. Let's call it school. Let's use the word school because that's a word that many people are accustomed with. One, you could be either in a public school. Two, you could be in an independent school. Or three, you've got to be in a home school. When is that supposed to happen? Between the ages of 6 and 7, up until you reach the age of 15. That is when you, as a child, as a minor, are of school compulsory age. In other words, the state says you, as a parent, are obligated to take your child to school. It's your choice. If you then decide to do homeschooling, and I think the word homeschooling is used in the South African Act, then there are a few provisos that the state says that you've got to comply with. You've got to use a curriculum which is not substandard to the current curriculum in a public school. Now, that is a bone of contention, not part of this specific paragraph that we are discussing right here and right now. Then you've got to, as a parent, be the principal educator. In other words, I, as a parent, parents, we take responsibility for our own homeschool at home. As a parent, I can use whatever resources I want. I could take my child to tutor for an hour or two or three. I could use this book, that book, or the next book. I could use a library. I could take my child and be part of the sporting activities in the school. Whatever the case may be, I as a parent can use any resource that I feel is suitable in my home school. What the state and the different provincial departments are quite adamant about is I cannot profess to do homeschooling or home education at my home if I take my child to a tutor or any other description, leave them there from 7:30 in the morning, and collect them only at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and then go home. Because then I'm actually taking my child to a quasi school. And what do they say? If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it probably is a duck. And that is what the provincial departments are quite adamant about. They say that is not allowed. You, as a parent, are taking full responsibility. Now show us that you are actually, in all shapes and forms, taking on that responsibility. As the state, as the provincial education department, I would like you to show me that you're doing lesson planning. Show me what resources. Doesn't really matter about the curriculum now. Show me what resources are you using. Show me that the curriculum is age appropriate for your child at one specific age. Not one specific grade necessarily, but age appropriate. Show me that you are keeping score of academic progress. They're not obligating me as a home education or homeschool parent to go about to a professional teacher to draw up a report card. I'm allowed to do that if I want to, but you're not obliged to do that. As a home educator, you are actually encouraged to use as many resources as you possibly can. At this point in time, there has been talk they do not require the parent to have some kind of qualification to be able to qualify to do home education or have a home school. Not yet. I know there was speak about it. I haven't heard that in quite a fair amount of time, so that is not a proviso there. But that's the long of short and the short of the homeschooling as we see it currently. Unfortunately, the provincial departments do not like you to use an online school. Now, and that is because probably an online school is a very strange beast to them. They don't really understand what an online school actually takes responsibility for, and they see an online school as an unregistered educational institution. And as you rightly know, they don't like stuff which is not registered and which is not accredited. Nonetheless, as online schools, we operate under a concession from Umalusi. Now, who's Umalusi? As you know, Umalusi is the accreditation body in South Africa. They are mandated to accredit the National Senior Certificate. In other words, all the results of the National Senior Certificate, the grade 12s, go through them, they look at it, they moderate it, and then they release those results as being valid and reliable. Not only that, they standardize it not across 1 year, but they actually standardize that across many historical years, going back for a number of years. And the reason why they do that is the feeling is that if I, as a 60-year-old, present to you my certificate, 62 years old, that I got in 1982, it should be as valid when I present you an A or a B as a candidate who in 2026 will present their matric certificate with an A or a B or a C on it. So my symbol on my matric certificate should be as valid and reliable as the one that a young man or a young lady presents at the end of this year. An A should always be an A B should always be a B. So they've got an extremely big job to do. But that's exactly what they are there for, and it's the only job. The other thing that they accredit are independent schools. In other words, they say, here are the norms and standards for an independent school, and you are supposed to adhere to the following criteria. If you don't, we will not accredit you. In other words, we will not say, fine, well done, you are an independent school, you comply with the minimum standards which is required by the education department. Happy with that? And then they give you a number. The third thing that they are mandated to do is they accredit examination bodies. And that's actually one of the most awesome things that they can actually do, to my mind though. What they do is they say, all right, according to the South African law, anybody who is willing and able can register an examination board as an independent education institution. But Umalusi has oversight over that. So one of the many things that examination boards has to comply with, one of the many regulations and rules and standardizations and norms of standard that examination bodies has to adhere to is also monitored by Umalusi. So in the end, all of the exam boards in South Africa, now you can consider, to my mind, all the 9 provinces as being an exam board. SACAI, which is the South African Comprehensive Assessment Institute, and then the IEB, the Independent Examination Board. Those are the only 2 private ones currently in South Africa. All of them are accredited by Umalusi. So, when a young person walks out with an NSC certificate, and they fulfilled all the requirements for the NSC certificate, Umalusi comes along and they issue a certificate with their logo on it. Not that of Brainline, not that of the IB, not that of Sakai, not of that of provincial departments. It carries the logo of Umalusi. It has a number at the top left and it's got a number at the bottom right. And it's got the signature currently of Dr. Rakometsi, which is the CEO of Umalusi as it stands. So the NSC issued by Umalusi carries the same weight. Whether I've done my NEC through the IB, whether I've done it through Sakai, or whether I've done it through any of the provincial boards, all across the board. The question immediately would be, okay, but how do they differ from each other? They differ in their approach to how do they present the curriculum and what is their aim. What would they like to do when a young person walks out having completed the IEB exam, having completed the Sakai exam? Now, the IB, which I'm a part of, is quite explicit in what their aim is. Their aim is to prepare all learners for tertiary studies or life after matric. The emphasis is on critical thinking, application of knowledge, and solving problems. That's what the aim of the IB is. Of Sakai, of whom I'm not a member, I cannot speak on their behalf. I can only speak of the exam board that we as Brainline are currently part of.
There's quite a lot that you have just mentioned, and I want to just go back to the beginning of the conversation when you discussed the minimum requirements of the curriculum. So for people who do not know, a curriculum could be what we are using in South Africa. Please correct me if I've got this wrong, but a curriculum could be what we have got in South Africa as CAPS. That is the minimum standard, if I'm correct, that everybody needs to follow. But you can also go, for instance, to Cambridge and do the A levels and the what is it, the A and AS levels, I think, and any other curriculum that you can find, which you might deem to be higher standard than CAPS. But you cannot stay at home with a home education and not do anything or just read a book once a month, because that will be less than the standard of the CAPS. Which brings me to something else you mentioned about, the education department want to see that you are on a certain level. So if a child, let's say for instance in grade 3, grade 4, is in a public school, they would be writing regular tests. Those tests are benchmarks of whether they achieve what the curriculum says they must achieve as the year carries on. And obviously the internet allows for organizations such as Brainline to do the same thing, where you can assess along the way. But how important is the assessment apart from a report, let's call it portfolio of evidence? Because if I understand correctly, ultimately everybody, whether you are full-time in school or whether you are home educated, and whether it's Sakai or IB or the normal DBE examinations, you still have to pass grade 12 exam. And that grade 12 exam is not administered by anybody apart from Umalosi. But are they also involved along the way? Do they also provide assessments in grade 6, for instance, grade 8, to see if their child is at least where they should be? Or is it up to the individual parent who are home educating to just make sure that their child is ready at the end of grade 12? How's that process in between being handled?
Sure, you're asking a lot of questions in one little paragraph. Let's start at the beginning. Um, CAPS is not really the curriculum. CAPS is the way that we assess. In other words, CAPS tells me, or the CAPS documents, the documents which is written for each and every subject or each and every learning area, tells me I have got to do so many orals, I've got to do so many tests, so many tasks. There should be the weighting of those marks in. That's what CAPS does. But the curriculum that we use is actually the revised national curriculum statement. That tells me what is the content in the different subjects that I'm supposed to be able to teach in any one school. The curriculum is completely different from the assessment. To get your question on how important is assessment, assessment is not there just to keep me busy. The ideal scenario or the reason why I should be engaging in assessment is two reasons to my mind. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to teach myself, or I'm trying to teach my child something. What am I trying to teach them? I'm trying to teach them how to speak fluently, using good grammar, using a good vocabulary, by doing orals, by doing an oral on a theme that I gave them beforehand. In other words, I know what I'm going to talk about, I get time to prepare, and then I speak to you. And you evaluate me on how well I've prepared, how good is my vocabulary, because why did I get to good vocabulary? I read a lot. I researched a lot. I Googled this. I watched YouTube videos, whatever the case may be. So I honed my oral skill by using a lot of other skills. So I'm assessing not only how do I speak to you, am I confident, am I looking you in the eye, am I expressing myself eloquently, am I using the correct sentences, am I sticking to the theme. I'm actually, when I'm doing an oral or taking down an oral of a learner, I'm testing multiple skills. I'm testing research skills, reading with insight, all sorts of things. So CAPS should not be about how do I get a report. CAPS should be, and that's the aim of CAPS being the assessment part. What am I trying to attain with this? What is the skill that I'd like my child to have in the end? Why am I getting my child to do a task? Testing research skills, honing research skills, reading with insight, etc., etc. And CAPS should be not the means, or rather, not the end, but the way that I teach my child. And in that perspective, there are two kinds of assessment that I can use. The one is formative. Formative means is I sit down and I watch you doing the task and I see you doing research and I look at it and I say, I see you've Googled what is photosynthesis. Can I do that a little bit better? Can I maybe say, what does a plant need to be able to photosynthesize, etc., etc., etc. So I help my child to do research a little better. In other words, I enhance their skills, I help them hone that specific skill by giving them guidance, by giving them a different resource, whatever the case may be. So that's actually what assessment is all about. But because
For
of
part of the learning process, am I correct? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Assessment should be part of learning.
It is part of learning and it should be part. The second kind of assessment is summative. That's when I sit down and I have my child run a test. Questions, answers, it's either right or wrong, and I get a mark. Now, all of those get added up together, and the Department of Education has given us explicit guidelines on how you put all of that together, and I get to a mark. And this mark is able to tell me, or supposed to be able to tell me, does my child get progress to the next grade or not? It has become such a contentious issue that CAPS, the word CAPS, has actually become, I would almost like to say, um, a sjambok that is used to target quite a few things and to get rid of quite a few things or to support quite a few arguments. And that's actually not what was supposed to happen. But here we are. Back to something I picked up when you spoke about earlier. I cannot just sit in homeschool and have my child do this or that and say it's fine. Theoretically, yes, I can do that. Provided if I go to the revised national curriculum statement and I read it through properly and I see what are the things that my child is supposed to cover, what are the learning areas. In theory, I can get whatever I want, use whatever resources I want to be able to. And that's the thing that I discovered with my children. When they got interested in something, they really zoomed into that. And that's the nice thing about homeschooling or home education. That is the space where you're able to allow your child to really get into what they're interested in until they've exhausted that theme and then feel that they would like to move on to something else. One of my favorite anecdotes that I used to use is my eldest daughter today. She's my financial manager. One doesn't really realize what you teach your children in home education or just in normal life until something happens and you realize what effect you have on your child. We were driving along and I don't know even if we were talking, I can't remember what we were talking about. And my oldest daughter said, Dad, that sign up there, what does that sign cost? Because it was a Brainline sign above, I think it was a robot or something like that. What does that sign cost? Is that sign real value for money? And I think she was about 11 or 12 years of age. That's not a normal feedback that you would expect of an 11 or 12-year-old. And that's when you discover, oh, this is why people choose home education. Because in a traditional school or an independent school, what you actually do is, Ms. Leonard van Woestrum used to say that as well. You take the child out of society, out of community, put him into a space between four walls, and now you've got to gather samples of life and feed it to this child in that space. Whereas in home education, homeschooling, the child is in the community. He or she learns from life, from doing, by being part of. And then you get, is it possible to call it collaborative or collateral learning? It's not even a word. But that's how a child accumulates knowledge without you even being intentional about it. And that's why people choose home education. Apart from all the life stuff, I think that's what for us was the thing. Both my daughters are entrepreneurs. Is it because that's all that I don't know? I ascribe it to us as being homeschoolers. They got to see what we did. They got to learn how we do it. And if they are susceptible to that, they will take that on. And that will become part of their lives. Had they been in four walls, in a space between four walls, I doubt whether that would have been the case.
Essentially, what you're saying is that homeschooling is very good in principle. Well, home education. It's a very good thing. It's natural for the humanity of a family, the parents and the children. You know, there's no real restrictions on it, as long as there are certain basic rules which the state dictates. Am I correct in saying that? So as long as you just keep above the threshold of what the state expects so that you don't neglect your child. Because that is obviously a danger. Somebody can say, I am homeschooling, in inverted commas, but they are just simply not doing anything. The child grows to 14, 15 years of age and cannot read or write because they've neglected that along the way under the banner of home education. And the state basically just wants to prevent that. Am I summarizing it good enough there?
Yes, but there's another proviso. Home education, homeschooling should be in the interest of your child. Homeschooling is not the school, is not the A plus school for all children, and neither does it suit all families. It should always be something that both, well, it is doubtful whether home education parents find it joyful every day. I think it's I use the analogy of it's almost like deciding you're becoming a vegetarian. It's like you just throw everything out and you've got to start from scratch, and it becomes a real issue. It becomes something that you've got to grapple with. It doesn't come easy. It is difficult. It's a completely different lifestyle. But when all is said and done, you should be able to sit down and say, this was the correct choice for my children and for me. For me as well, not many people talk about the interest of the parent, but in the end, that is a big part of it. The interest of the child is of primary concern. Yes, it is. But if the parent is not able to partake in this and find joy in this and be part of this.
Colleen, yeah, sorry, we had a bit of a technical difficulty there for a few minutes, and unfortunately, we lost your train of thought where you were. So we did have some nice discussion points, while we were waiting for the technical issue to resolve itself. But I would love for you to carry on with your sentiment on. We were talking about a calculator. Whether a calculator makes your brain lazy if you are actually making it faster, or you actually completing the task faster if you can do it with a calculator. It doesn't necessarily make your brain lazy. And you had the example of your dad. I would like for you to maybe just repeat that, where you mentioned something very, 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 very important, is that we fight Alzheimer's and dementia. In other words, brain degradation by using our brains. It's not necessarily that whether you're using mental maths or a calculator or an Excel spreadsheet, as long as you are keeping yourself sharp by using your brain. And just relate that to AI. As a student, let's take it down to the child. We don't want the child to become not skilled, adapt at problem solving. You also mentioned problem solving is a very important thing to do in the real life after school. So, if I understand you correctly, AI is just another tool. It's just a screwdriver in your toolkit that you can use, but it's not going to take over your brain activity. But please elaborate on that and tell us about your dad. I find that fascinating with his mental math
Yeah,
skills.
that's a very wide question, and one could put into that answer as much as you like or as little as you like. Yes, we were just talking about the calculator, and my dad walking. He was growing indigenous trees here on our little small holding a number of years ago, and he would walk, and he would, in his mind, he would add up the numbers as people took the trees and add them all and loaded them up on the trailer. And having done all of that, he will tell the guy, okay, you owe me this much. And the guy would say, really? And then my dad would take the piece of paper and write it down, and in the end, write the number. And the guy would come on with his phone, and yeah, and my dad was right because he mentally added up all the numbers. Does that mean my dad was faster, slower? Does that mean my dad had advantages above somebody else? Yes and no. But did he have a skill that very few people have? That's an absolute yes. But what you and I spoke about earlier as well is I can ask AI almost anything and get an answer. I've noticed using applications such as Manus. I'm sure you're familiar with Manus. Manus is also an AI tool. It depends on how you ask your question, and it depends on what the wording of your question is, which will then result in a particular answer. But AI or those AI tools are quite clever as well. They would also say, but didn't you want me to also elaborate on the following, which relates to your first question? Or maybe even more, and it'll offer to do more things for you. It'll offer to write you a letter. It will offer to write you a PowerPoint presentation. It will offer to write you to make you a little video. It'll offer to draw you a picture or an image that you can use without you even asking that. But in the end, what we need to be able to do is, having accumulated all of those answers, we need to evaluate that answer. Is this something that I can use? Is it fit? Is it proper? Is it suitable? And then, how do I implement this? Say, for instance, Marnus has given me a business plan, and I started implementing the business plan, and I run into trouble. Say, for instance, let's take the example of my dad. I start planting indigenous trees. But I end up in a situation where some trees grow well and some trees don't. And then I go to AI and I give AI a photograph and I say, but Marnus, why does this tree grow well and that tree does not? If I did not have the background in training as a biologist to realize there are so many factors playing into this, Marnus will only give me, well, look at the sunshine, look at water, look at feeding, look at the soil, look at the pH of the soil, look at the container that it's in, look at the temperature, look at the rainfall, etc., etc., etc. So it'll give me another plan, but I will not be able to look at that plan and understand what are the implications of all these factors that Marnus has given me. But if I had the training as a biologist, and you spoke earlier about not needing a matric certificate, Harry, I'm going to differ from you slightly. Because what does a matric certificate do? Any qualification for that matter, not only matric, what does that do? All qualifications, it doesn't matter to me how little, how big, how important, diploma, certificate, degree, in-house training, it doesn't matter to me. That teaches me a vast number of things. It teaches me to find, first of all, the problem, identify the problem. And once I've done that, it teaches me how to find the solution to that problem. Doesn't matter what I've studied, whether it was in home education, in my parents' house, in my dad's business, in my mom's business, it doesn't really matter. I was taught certain things. But what a qualification does, and that's what it's supposed to do, is teach me the bottom line. These are the things that you need to look at. 4. If I'm a doctor, let's take the example to my mind. Doctors seemingly knows everything, don't they? They've studied for 7 years. And then they did 2 years of practical. And then they studied another 7 years. And they become specialists. They know everything. Or do they? What they actually do is they sharpen their skill of finding the problem so sharp, sharper if I may use the term, sharper than a menorah blade, so that they can distinguish the root of the root problem, address that, and then that leads to the solution. So they've only actually become extremely skilled in finding the problem. Because what do you do as a patient? You sit on the chair and you tell them how absolutely awful you feel. And what do? Tell me more. Oh, I got up this morning with a fever. Tell me more. When did this fever start? Tell me more. And this is what they do. And because of their training, They got so sharp. They got so fine. They so refined their skill in finding my problem that I can actually pick up the book as a doctor, that big fat book on the side of my desk, which gives me a list of 10,573 billion medicines. Open it on page 52 because I know what family of medicines I'm looking for, and find me the medicine that I'm supposed to have, if I'm lucky, by the way. But yes, AI cannot teach you that. AI cannot teach you problem solving skills, even though it can give me the answer, because it's got its own problem solving skills. Why would it give it to me?
Well, you see, this is something that I would like to address. I also want to talk about, as we talked offline for a while, about the humanity of a human, whether it's a teacher or a parent, in charge, let's call it in charge, in inverted commas, of a minor, of a child's education. There needs to be empathy, there needs to be insight, there needs to be nurturing, something that AI can never do. I think we have to accept that AI can make you faster, but it cannot make you, or it cannot make itself human. There are certain things that a human has to be able to do better than an AI. But what you just said about AI can't teach you reasoning, this is actually what I'm zooming in on. Because when you look at the large language models, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or any of, there's so many of them. Yes, if you give it a problem, it will give you the answer. So it's very fast in research. But I'm interested in discovering whether AI can be trained to actually teach you that whole process, of learning, discovering the knowledge as you go along. Because what is involved with that? If, let's say, for instance, we take the example of a sneeze, the doctor, that you just said, I'm sneezing and I'm sneezing continuously. What will the doctor do? Like you just said, they'll start somewhere. Okay, when did it start? How frequent is it? Do you find periods of reprieve where you don't sneeze? And eventually they'll come into or zoom in on what makes it. Is it the hay fever? Is it an allergy? Is it sinuses maybe? Is it just the air? I remember as a child myself, I had terrible hay fever until we moved to the coast. Just when we moved to Durban, suddenly my hay fever just disappeared all by itself because the air was more
Yeah.
humid. Um, Doctors would have been able to go through that process of question, answer. And that is what I find AI doesn't do on the large language model scale. It answers and it suggests more things, which looks like it may be actually asking, do you like me to? It will say, do you like me to, or would you like me to? But it's not really stopping and checking and taking you through the learning process. Now, I am convinced that AI can be trained if you produce something that's called the agentic approach. You can actually train your AI to become an educator, but never replace the teacher. I think that's very important, just to pinpoint. It's not about replacing the teacher or the parent as the teacher because of that humanity that I've spoken about earlier. But what are your thoughts about AI as and coming back to the original general description, a learning tool where it actually takes the child and stops, ask a question, wait for a response, evaluates that response, and then proceed a little bit further, like a good doctor would do, or a good engineer, or a good designer. Any profession really needs to be able to get the information they want to problem solve, as you've rightly said a few times. In order to problem solve, you need a certain skill. And that is what I hear you saying learning is all about, is learning how to problem solve. Can AI help with that?
I think, Harry, not you, Harry, we as parents, as teachers, underestimate children. when it comes to their own drive for learning stuff. We underestimate their yearn for knowledge. We underestimate their interest in stuff. To get back to your question, can AI be a learning tool? I think it can be an awesome learning tool. Because as long as the kids are asking questions, AI will be there to teach. The proviso at this point in time is AI information is not always correct, but it will get more and more correct as we go because AI teaches itself. As long as a child is able or willing or wanting to ask a question, AI will be there to teach. It is our responsibility to see to it that the questions are asked properly and that the answers are correct. For instance, I think it's an AI tool called Grok in Britain, which they've discovered, oh my goodness, this little thing creates images which are very unsavory. And they had to intervene because it's open. It was an open, Hannes used to say, we're back in Los Angeles. If I'm driving on my bicycle, we're back in Los Angeles. What's going to happen to me? I'm going to fall as sure as I can. I'm going to fall because there are no restrictions. There's nothing guiding me, keeping me upright. There's nothing keeping me on the road. So Grok got a little bit of trouble in the UK, I think, because of that. So we have to be careful when we get to AI and say, AI, wonderful, go, ask questions, get the answers. Again, I'm returning back to my previous comment on we've got to be cyber citizens, responsible cyber citizens. But if we as home educators or teachers sit next to the child, encourage the child to ask questions, and then together with them evaluate the answer. Is this answer correct? Is it proper? Is it applicable? Is it fit? Is it suitable? Then you've got a teaching tool.
That is a very, very valid point you're making. And I want to add a word to what you've just said before I carry on, and that is guardrails. You know, you mentioned rails, but in the context of AI speak, we call it guardrails, where it cannot move outside of certain boundaries, which your
Correct.
normal, typical large language model don't have. I mean, yes, it does. Sure, it does have guardrails, but it's not as strict as, for instance, history. You know, if you want to teach grade 7 history, you need to put certain guardrails in place that, you know, don't go to advanced history or don't go outside of the topic that we are busy with, whichever that might be. And the same goes for all subjects. So when a child is sitting with AI and learning about the Second World War, for argument's sake, let's say what leads up or what led up to the Second World War. You know, what was the trigger for the Second World War to happen? Then within those guardrails, if the user of the AI asks the right questions, the AI will come back with all the right answers. Because, and I think this is important to understand, AI is actually, I think, not really intelligence at all. Whether artificial or real is not really intelligence at all because we don't really know what intelligence is. But what AI is, we know that for a fact, it's a mathematical model of probabilities. You know, it just literally predicts what the next word should be depending on what it received with weights and everything, probability um, uh, uh, directions that it decides and how to answer, which is a major technological advance for the world. I mean, AI as such is so much better than a Google search, for instance, because it can converse with you. You know, it can talk
Yeah,
back. It can understand
it
your
seemingly
context.
does. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it seemingly does. Very important word, I think. It seemingly does. Um, but in that context of speaking to it and getting questions answered, the maturity of the user needs
Yeah.
to be such that you actually keep on interrogating back. Would
Yes.
would a typical child, and I'm specifically referring to a child in a homeschool, home education environment where the parents are involved, and a child that goes to school, goes to sport, and then come home and has to do homework, both of them, where the parents of your typical school, public school children may not be as involved because they get home, they need to make dinner, and then they go to sleep. That the two different sides of that coin of learner, how would they use the AI differently, or would they use it the same because they are naturally curious? You said they have got a yearning for knowledge. Would they take the shortcut and just write down whatever is there, or would they have that maturity level?
Let's not beat about the bush. Kids are kids, students are students, young people are young people, and we are all human. They will take the shortcuts. Guaranteed, 95% of the time, they will. But in the end, they will sit in that exam hall and they will be responsible for their own answers on that absolutely blank piece of paper.
Without AI.
Lots of them then get to a stage where they're supposed to write from the 15th of October. August, they suddenly realize, having written the preliminary exams, oh my goodness, I have a problem, AI or not. So AI was not the factor here. AI, and it's been like that for decades. You and I ended up in August suddenly discovering we have a problem, Houston, because we did not study, whatever the case might have been, AI or not. So the ideal situation would just be that if you are able to instill that sense of responsibility in our learners, so that they realize by themselves, without us insisting on them realizing it, they realize themselves that they have a responsibility. All right, now I've got lots of kids running up here, but they should realize by themselves and reach that maturity by themselves that I'm responsible for my own future. I'm responsible for what goes on this blank piece of paper. Other than that, there's not a lot more that we can do.
But what if they get to the point where it's too late? You know,
They
to
always
actually
do.
do something about it.
Lots of us do. 1.2 million kids enter grade 1, as far as I know, last numbers I remember. Only 700,000 eventually write that exam. 80% of those, 80% of 700 odd thousand, actually attain the national senior certificate. Now you can decide what proportion of that would you like to attribute to life, situation, circumstance, fate, or sense of responsibility. I don't think we know. Let's just randomly take the 80% of the 700,000 that do get a certificate, the balance who do not. How many of those is because of the fact that they didn't realize this is important? How many come back and they have a second chance, or they take a second chance, redo a few subjects? Hundreds of them come back having had the insights, having realized, oh my goodness, I've got to do this. That's the best answer that I have for that. And it's got nothing to do with AI.
Well, I want to throw a little something back to you on that sentence, that point you just made, because AI is here. Like a calculator was there for me at school, like Google search was there for the last 20 years for any child who had to do any kind of project. They can go and Google the resources that they need. Now, suddenly, AI for the last, what is it, 3, 4 years have been here. It's there. In order to help the children not fall into that trap of realizing too late that they didn't do what they were supposed to do, can we get the AI earlier on to assist in that wake up call by not just giving the answers. If we can, let me rather rephrase the question. If we can get the AI to refrain from just doing the homework or just giving the answers, playing to the kids' strength of taking the easy way out. If an AI can do that, how much of a problem would that solve in terms of grade 12 results, for argument's sake? What do you think?
I think it goes further than just AI.
Mhm.
You're going to be quite irritated with me. I've got to take you back to the cyber citizen story.
Mhm.
And we are not cyber citizens, responsible cyber citizens, because we don't have access. Computers, laptops, our phones has become like a pen and pencil. We cannot do without it. And yet our children do not have access to it. And I'm not talking only about disadvantaged schools or under-resourced schools. I'm talking about the run-of-the-mill, grassroots variety child in a public, sometimes even an independent schools, where they are supposed to have access. It should be like a pen. It should be like a ruler. It should be like a book with paper in it. Yet we expect of them to then display a lot of maturity and responsibility when they do have minimal access at the end, close to the finalization of their school years. What a sorry state of affairs is that? So to me, this is not an AI question. This to me is, I sometimes use the example, many years ago, I don't even remember how many years ago. And I think he was still part of the province and not an MEC, I'm not sure. But Nyasa Lesufi bought a whole lot of iPads and stuck it into 2 or 3 schools. And I would bet my bottom dollars, those who read that article said to themselves, give it a week and they'll all be stolen. It happened. But here's where I'd like to give credit where it's due. He gave a school a bunch of iPads. It's actually what should happen everywhere, all around, to all schools, like a tsunami of digital access, a tsunami of access to data, a tsunami of let's teach our children computer skills. Because all of these questions will be answered if we teach our children how to use the pen and paper properly. Because that's their tool, it's what they're supposed to use. Even now in 2026, we have kids with special learning needs who have the option of applying for computer accommodation. It will help them to know and to be able to write their papers on computer. And then what? They aren't able to type fast enough. Why? Why do we type with one finger, for heaven's sake? Why do our children know only how to type with a thumb? Really?
You're making such a valid point there. I've picked up that there seems to be like a movement of schools specifically who are completely blanking out any access to technology because they think by taking us back 20 years, they are doing the kids a favor. And you are saying, no, we are living in 2026. Whether you're 3 years old or 30 years old, you are still in 2026, 2025, 2027, whatever. You need to be adept and skilled at what you are witnessing in the world around you. And if you are a youngster, if you are 3 years old, you need to have adult supervision so that you don't get exposed to the malicious side of the internet and the malicious side
until I have the maturity. Exactly. Yes. Today, as I sit here, it is expected of all of us, regardless of our age, from the age of 16 and on, 18 and on, to manage all of your security on your phone.
Yes.
But you were not educated, but it is expected.
Yes.
It is expected that you run your financial life on your phone. It is expected that you submit everything to SARS and all the powers that be in a digital format. But I'm not taught how to do that at school.
That is such a valid argument, Colleen. I really thank you for that. You know, that is such a high point to get to in this conversation that, and I mean, it speaks to the whole idea of home education more than anything else. Involved parents. So whether you are involved with your kids and they are in a public school, but you get involved with them in the afternoons and the evenings, or whether you are involved with them from when they wake up to they go to bed, you need, as a parent, for the youngsters, not shy away from technology. You should actually embrace it, become
Exactly.
a parent in the process.
Exactly.
And that
Correct.
brings me to one of my previous guests. I keep quoting him, you know, on every podcast, because he actually summarized this whole thing. He said, in order for us to thrive in an AI world, we actually need to become more human. You know, and somebody else said on a podcast that I listened to, said, you know what, with Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all these other social media platforms, they promised us that we are going to be connected. You know, we are going to be connected more with friends and family and so forth. But we know the damage that Facebook and similar platforms has created in terms of loneliness, in terms of people being cut off from any real human touch and human experiences. And he made the point that maybe AI is actually the intelligence that brings us back to becoming more human. Now, that's a very general statement. I want to cut into the learning part of it and say it becomes AI essentially will teach parents to become better human parents. Get more involved with your child, because if you don't, they're going to be exposed to very strange things. If you keep it, and this is what you're saying, if you keep them away from it, you are actually disadvantaging them for the real world out there. That an accurate summary of your sentiments?
It's absolutely. There's one more thing that I'd like to add on to it. It's like armor plating your child.
Yes.
You are putting your child into a good old knight's suit, ready to fight the world if you do that, because knowledge is power. That's what it's all about.
What a high point to close this conversation. I think we are almost at the end, so I want to just quickly thank you for your time this afternoon, for agreeing to speak to me. I think this has been such a high point to end this on. Totally contradictory to what most people believe, but I love that. So, Colleen, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time this afternoon.
Only a pleasure. Thank you, Harry.